A couple of weeks ago, I made a Spec advertisement for the Apple Watch Ultra 2. So in this video, I wanted to break down the entire editing process behind that. So here's the advertisement for you before I break it down.
Mix the walk up with my Sprite, turn it gelatinate. Say you sip lean, you can't prove shit. Never paying for the clothes like a true fit. Late night drive, tell me put the brief moonless. Posted in the castle when you fuck because I'm broke. Get me cool straight from Afghanistan.
So for starters, I kind of just want to zoom into the general timeline. A lot of just really quick clips based in motion blur. So as you can tell, if I open up the effects tab, there's a motion trail here, and then there's motion trails in all of these upcoming pieces as well. And these are most of like the action pieces that are used. As you can see on the side of this timeline, there are a lot of different action pieces of us just doing a bunch of different workouts and capturing it from the left side, which is one of my big things going into filming this. I didn't have many rules. One thing I wanted to make sure I did was to shoot on the left side as much as possible. A big thing for spec ads is also the music. And so I opted to use a song from SD Kid called Cali Man. So what I ended up doing was actually downloading the instrumental, which is obviously what you can see is used in this right here and then this right here. These are two different parts of the song that I just ended up using that work together. So you can kind of see that I added this like zoom down when I changed the pacing of the song, and then it leads back into another segment of the instrumental as well, which then later leads into the actual lyrics that are in the song. So I'll play the beginning for you and then break that little section down. The general idea of the script, which will be on screen right now, it's really not a script. It's really just a general shot list. Here is where I kind of added in the first bit of, I guess, really important sound design. So obviously in the very beginning, there's a couple of different sound design things going. I have a bow and arrow effect, which just works for pulling the weight up. An electric lawnmower for pushing something across the turf that was just reverbed a little bit to make it sound lower. Clothes dropping, it's like a pile of clothes dropping for kind of dropping or loading the bar up with weight, and then a Foley sound of tension kind of gripping the bar, and then a drag sound for pulling the row machine. Personally, I use this thing called Pixabay. It is completely free. You can see in all of my recently searched. To break this down, I actually use a lot of tracking in these videos, and I think it just helps with the flow of it. So I'm going to try to explain it as best I can. So I actually didn't use a lot of tracking in the very beginning because there is so much going on, and I kind of wanted to focus on the motion blur. This was a shot that I knew I wanted to do and knew I wanted to plan it out. So we'll go into the Fusion tab and I'll show you really quickly how I did this. And so basically I just added a tracker node. Firstly, what I did was I just put the point on the AirPod and I tracked it. So you can obviously see the center of the frame is exactly what's constantly changing. And then I go into operation and do the operation match move and move the background only. And so that allows us to actually see the center of the AirPod stay the same. And so you can see as that's going, I actually did end up zooming in and out of kind of keeping the AirPod in the center of the frame, rather than it just being like kind of smaller in the frame, because an AirPod is an Apple product, which is what we're showing up in this advertisement. And so you can kind of see how it just like sits there in his ear. And then obviously within this little edit section, I do have this effect that I added on a lot of things, which is prism blur. There's not much of this video that's not in black and white, and I knew I wanted a lot of this video to be in black and white. I kind of basically just did a super simple Luma wipe. So that's like the super easy transition, as you can see here. And that leads into a prism blur. Not much else is really color graded here. And then we cut through a couple of different exercises. Now this one is also tracked, but you can't really tell because it's a very simple track. I'll show you right here. You can obviously see the track, and you can see in the very top of the track, not much of the location of the screen actually changes. And then the same thing goes for this little area. Like, it's mostly staying on the center of the Apple Watch. Not much of the surrounding location is changing. And then the same thing goes here. This was probably the hardest one to do because he's pushing something out of frame. And so you kind of see how a lot of the top gets cut off right away. And you can also tell in the edit, I had to zoom in a lot and I added a lot of prism blur so you couldn't really tell where the flaw was. A lot of the prism blur is just there to increase the intensity of it. This actually was not planned at all from the beginning. I will actually go ahead and show you the original shot that we had for this because it looks nothing like what the final shot was. And so This is what the original shot was. It was kind of just me zooming in. Obviously, my friend is breathing in, and then he goes ahead and grabs the bar. In the edit, it plays a lot differently than that original clip just because I couldn't really fruitionize it the way that I wanted to with just a deep breath in and a deep exhale. Instead, I actually did a little bit more tweaking, and I'll show you right now. There are a couple of big elements to this. Obviously, yes, I am tracking the back of my friend's body, but that's not really the main thing. That's mostly just so when I add the motion blur, there is something for the frame to actually move around and create blur around. As you can tell in the corner keyframe section on the rotation side of it specifically, I ended up rotating this so much. Like I started pretty much completely upside down, and then we flatten out right before the cross dissolve starts, and then we cross dissolve into a black and white frame. But what I did this time was, instead of just having the film grain as a regular overlay, so when you go to composite, it's just overlay for this original one before there's any sort of major color switch, which obviously you can also tell there's prism blur just like all of the other color footage. But when you go to this, you can see it's negative, and I actually use the difference filter and just put it into 2-second clips and kind of staggered it throughout this little section to build a little bit of inherent tension, just because I really, really liked it. This was a very last minute decision for me. This wasn't something I creatively had come up with. And I also actually wanted to make this next scene negative as well, but then I decided, since we are focusing on the Apple Watch specifically, I didn't want to make any shot with the Apple Watch prominently in it to be something that was negative. My favorite thing about this like negative grain switch though is the sound effects that I paired with it. I've never really used this before, but I found this really cool rumbling sound. I also did a deep breath sound effect, which, as you can see on the side, I actually changed the tone of it, and I also changed the depth on it of the equalizer in the audio editing. So that was really cool. Instead of just having a regular deep breath, it kind of made it more echoey. I have this rumbling sound effect as well as a very, very light heartbeat that kind of just fades in and out. And that's kind of where we get into actually just lifting the weight itself. And this is kind of like the exertion peak of the advertisement, which was kind of the point for me. The best way I found to actually have emphasis on this was a mix of prism blur and motion blur as well. Here's where I really felt like I had to build a lot of very quick momentum because it's a really quick montage. So I ended up doing just a lot of stacking of sound effects, and that leads us into this final montage. You have a weighted ball throw, a row, pushing plates, and then a side row, and then obviously just running on a treadmill as well. This is another place where I really wanted to track stuff. I didn't get to do too much tracking with this first shot. Originally, I had it way more tracked to this like blur that is the Apple Watch, but it ended up just being way too quick and you couldn't really see what was going on. Here I actually did end up tracking the Apple Watch. As you can see, it is a very, very light track. You can't really tell anything else, but you just zoom in, and when you zoom into the actual advertisement, you can see how it zooms into the Apple Watch. This is probably my favorite track of the entire video. It feels so centered, and then that shake also works really, really well. And then that leads us to the row, which again, obviously I track the Apple Watch here. And then the running, I really just added motion blur because you weren't going to be able to tell the watch there anyway. This is more so for strictly momentum. You have a little bit of a zoom sound effect, a blow sound effect, and then obviously you have the Apple Watch font. The font that I found online that was used for the Apple Watch and a lot of the Apple marketing for their watches was MyRad Pro. I couldn't find a download specifically, so I kind of just did a little green screen action and it worked out fine for me. And then I did a little bit of a ding and muffle on the audio itself, and then cut to the Apple logo. But that wraps up my breakdown for my Apple Watch Ultra 2 spec ad.